The Garden of Eden was man's first awakening into the consciousness of being that which is like God or just God. We'll talk about in today's transmission what that has to do with you materializing your reality of the wish fulfilled, being able to direct and guide your awareness rather than just continuing to inherit the default base of the 3D that is operating against you, that is operating for and against your empowered, or I was going to say for your disempowerment and against your empowerment. But either way, my name is Lucien Francois Mateo St. James. I am a spiritual epidemiologist, and thank you for joining me and co creating this moment, this transmission of the Ministry of Assumption Absolute. This message is brought to you by and is courtesy of the Electric Temple, and I'm here to encourage you in knowing with empowered conviction the truth of your transcendent divinity, that you are God. Now, I am not really at all so fundamental basis for all ministry transmissions, whether they be in the form of lectures, point of views, transmissions, sermons, is that we're living in a 3D holographic reality in the sense that none of what we see with our 3D senses is fixed, is rigid, or has a shape that cannot be manipulated by the activity of awareness through consciousness, and that we are individual expressions of God. Those are the two fundamental truths that are the bedrock of everything that I have to say, and everything that I see to be as truth of this reality. So when we look at the ancients, and we look at the ascended masters, and we look at the sacred holy texts that apparently are relevant to different religious traditions, I'm not really concerned about if those things happened specifically or not. What I mean is, am I at all concerned about Jesus being a real person? There are so many accounts of Jesus maybe being multiple people, like it being a collection of stories from different teachers of the same time. Half the Bible was adopted from like ancient Egypt and different creation stories anyway. Uh, Jesus could have been here or not been here. I think, what we have left of what might have been of an ascended master, maybe many ascended masters, are, I guess, evidenced in the Gospels, but the Gospels were written after, quote unquote, Jesus died. And there's no way, I mean, if we look at the time periods, that they weren't influenced by the writings of Paul at that point in time. And Paul was in prison, so Jesus never even wrote anything down. So, as to if Jesus actually happened or not, I think that there's stories that are encoded into this game that if you look at them with a particular lens, or you look at them with a particular insight about who you are, which is what I'm here to do, is to help you remember that, because I'm not telling you anything, I'm helping you remember what you already know. Thank you for co-creating this moment, because you've summoned me to tell you what you already know about all of this. I'm not concerned as to what the specific historical details. I mean, if you just look up the time frames through which the Bible was written, I mean, it's a shit show. It's a mess. Like, I mean, it's a it's a greatest hits volume of what could have been. I mean, and that's just talking about the Bible. I'm not even going to get into the other texts, but we are going to keep it here for today. So, but let's take apart the beginning. Let's take apart Genesis. So, Adam and Eve, like, just listen to that. Atom, 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 Adam, atom, source. So, Adam, and Eve. What is Eve? A beginning. These are all in Genesis. That's what I'm saying. I'm looking at like the story of all of this. Like, how does this come together as a narrative? What might be a metaphysical interpretation of this? What is this? What is this? Is saying on a level of symbol, and not like where there are two people in this like heavenly realm. Which we're going to talk about that, because I believe that the Garden of Eden was. Um, man's first awakening into knowledge as God. So, beginning in Genesis 1, God created the trees and the stars and all this other stuff. Later on, God creates man in his image. Okay, well, listen to that. Yes, I mean, that right there is telling you if you are created from source consciousness, you are source consciousness. Yes, represented through an individualized expression, but you're not separate from it. There's not what source consciousness creates and then the rest. Like that wouldn't really make sense. You cannot create something and then not be of it. I mean, if we think about what a parent is, okay, well, two people. Now, I don't know the genealogical breakdown. I'm sure that, I'm no genealogist, but generally we accept that, there is a mixing of DNA from both parents. And I don't know that I was going to say, oh, it's probably 50-50, but I don't even think that's the case, because like, why do some kids come out looking, I don't know. I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not a genealogist. I'm very, I'm always upfront about my areas of ignorance. So, but there's an understanding, like there's not two parents and then those two parents get it on and then there's a child and that child isn't separate from the essence or the genealogy of those two parents. Like we can accept that doesn't make sense. So if God made you, and again, we're talking about like the Bible here. So like, it's written. You just have to be careful about who you're listening to, and don't listen to me if it doesn't resonate. I mean, you have to find your own truth. I mean, and that's the core of this teaching today. That is the point: is that you have to find your own truth. So God creates man, as somewhere in Genesis 1. God creates man in His image, yet the image is separate from God. No, that wouldn't make basic sense. That wouldn't make basic sense. So if God creates man in His image, that means that the man is the image of God, which means that man is an individualized expression of God, that the trees are individual expressions of God, that the cosmos and the galaxies. And when I say God, I just mean the beginning of the origin of source consciousness, if there was an origin to begin with. I'm not talking about a Christian God, an angry man in the sky, waiting to smite thee. I'm not talking about that. So that happens. Then, God creates, the rest of everything else, the rest of quote unquote Eden. But then, realizes, and then so I think it's somewhere in Genesis 1. Later on, God says, this land is yours after, God creates man. Be fruitful and multiply. Now, to me, that sounds like slavery. That sounds like have a bunch of babies, and tend to the land, and that's all you have to do. Don't eat from, so we're going to get to that. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Have a bunch of babies. I mean, doesn't this sound like what we're all doing in base level consciousness? That, if we're talking about a base level of consciousness or a lower level of consciousness, what the average human is doing is they're working, they're fixated on food, survival resources, and they're making babies. That's pretty much what's happening, and in that survival mode, there oftentimes isn't space for the consideration of, if you're in that state, how to take care of said children, and just more children just keep appearing, keep spawning. So on a base level of consciousness, I mean, that which is maybe similar to primates, food and fucking. That's it. Should be root chakra stuff, and the root chakra is not bad, but to stay there. So God creates man in His image, but then somehow, some way, that man is supposed to, essentially be God's slave, and tend to these lands that God's created. And it was all very good. It was all so good. God saw what He created and it was good. So the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply, and subdue this land. Well, look around Earth. I think we've pretty well done subdued it. I pretty well think, we've raped the forests. We've raped the forests. And, there's an energy crisis and we're fighting each other about whose religion is right, and that war never ends, and what resources these people have, and who's doing what over there, and what these people, their skin color and their belief systems, they don't match mine, so they must be like. I mean, the world is subdued. We subdued it. We removed the animals out of their natural habitats. Everything's corporate. Everything's conglomerate. Everything's supersized. We're killing ourselves. Big pharma and processed food. It's subdued. It's subdued. So again, like that doesn't sound like it. Like take the earth, fill it with a bunch of babies, work the land, and dominate. But also, you're not God. Also, either you're just you just came forth out of me, but you have nothing to do with me, and I need you to believe that, because if you don't, you'll realize you have a lot more power than I'm giving you. So then, later on, Eve comes around, another beginning. Eve comes around, and then there's a serpent. Now, I don't think, here's the thing, so Revelation is the last book that's written in the Bible, and Revelation is the only place that mentions this serpent being cast down from heaven. So that was added later. That was added later. And everything in the Bible is written within a specific time, culture, and political context that then does have implications as to what the specific message was that was communicated. And again, none of this shit was even written. I'm talking about the Gospels now. Was even written when Jesus was here. Revelation's written later. So if we're looking at just Genesis without looking at Revelation, because the only reason we came to associate the serpent with being the devil, with being Lucifer, and Lucifer's only even mentioned once in the Bible, and that had to do with a king, that had to do with a mistranslation of a king that was wild and got cast down, essentially. And they were, at least in the text, kind of like making fun of like, star of the morning star, how thee have fallen. And then that was translated to mean, Lucifer, which just means like morning star, which means bearer of light. So they were calling this king Lucifer, essentially to kind of make fun of him. Like Lucifer has nothing to do with any of this. Revelation, which likens the verse in Revelation that likens the serpent to the devil, isn't even written till after all this shit. So I mean, it'd be the same thing as like, somebody like adding something on later to the end of a story to change the beginning, like to retroactively edit what was already there so it leads you to a different conclusion. Like, it's so fucked. It's so fucked. So anyway, the serpent comes along. Now, what are snakes? Snakes represent death and rebirth. Snakes represent transformation. Snakes can be venomous, yes. And if you are bitten by a venomous snake, it will end your life. But again, we're just back to rebirth. So snakes can represent endings. Absolutely. I'm not saying snakes are universally good. I'm not saying they're universally bad. But that's my point, is that, the symbol of the snake is very ambiguous and is very specific to the context in which it appears. I remember I had a dream about a black snake connected to an individual. It was at an individual's house that was several years ago, that I was about to go visit. And, I don't even remember the specifics of the dream, but I remember that individual, and I remember the dream, and I remember there being a black snake. And then I went to that person's house, and there was, they had a lot of property, a lot of land, and we were out by their lake, or not, I guess pond, whatever, I don't know, body of water. And there was a black snake that appeared. And I ended up leaving that person's house and almost died in a car wreck. Now, there are many details I'm not filling in there. There was lots going on. But that dream was telling me that, this person, and here's the thing, in that whole situation, did bring me, I do believe that I did die. I'm pretty sure I died, because I believe that we're dying all the time. I believe near-death experiences are deaths. You just chose not to end your character. You're the God of your consciousness just chose not to end that particular incarnation at that point in time, and then you come back. and you have crossed a threshold. So I do believe that I did die. I don't think it was a near death experience. I think I did die. I mean, I think you can die to an old identity today, that you don't need to have something like majorly physical happen. Um, and it really did launch me into a new trajectory of life based on what I learned in my dealings with that person and my propensity towards those types of individuals. So, in that situation, I mean, was the snake good or bad? The snake wasn't telling me she was good or bad, but an ending was going to occur. It was going to be venomous, it was going to be painful, and it was going to be transformative. So the serpent appears, right? And the serpent is not even likened to the devil till much later on. It's the last book written in the Bible. And certain Snurpet, and the Snurpet says, it sounds like a Dr. Seuss character, the Snurpet. And the serpent says, hey, because God says, in Genesis somewhere, it might be Genesis 1 or 2, you can eat from all the trees, work the land, here's Eve, but don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Now think about that. Just fucking think about it. Just think about it. Let's just think about it from that lens. Why the fuck would somebody tell you, not God, we take this out of Genesis. Why would somebody say, well, you don't need to know about that right now? Think about anytime you ask somebody a question and they said, no, I don't think you need that knowledge. I mean, what if somebody said it to you like that specifically? Like, you're allowed to do whatever you want. You're allowed to experience this environment, but do not ask me a single question about anything. Now, there's like ancient Eastern texts from Asian traditions that do talk about how the question is embedded in the answer, and the answers should only lead us to deeper questions, that there are no answers. I'm not necessarily talking about that school of thought, because I subscribe to that school of thought, Zen philosophy, and Zen philosophy doesn't have a large precedence or priority on seeking answers specifically, and finding the end, the total, the conclusion, the absolute final truth of something. It doesn't really even subscribe to that being something that is realistic in the first place. So I'm not talking about that, but I mean, think about, you ask your boss, well, why do we do it this way? Oh, you don't need to know about that. Think about any time you ask your parents, hey, why do I need to clean my room? Well, because I said so. I mean, it's kind of that same thing that happened with God, right? Or at least the God of this Bible. Now there's some hypotheses that suggest that Jesus isn't even the son of, again, this is all allegorical as well. It really doesn't matter. But Jesus isn't even the quote unquote son of that particular God, that particular God or consciousness was malevolent, controlling, domineering, warmongering, angry, the angry guy on the hill, and that Jesus was not a product of that specifically. Because I always wondered that too. I was like, even as a kid, as a Christian, I was just like, well, so I guess, like, was Jesus God's apology? Like, because this is totally different. I mean, like, I'm talking like basic Sunday school stuff. I was just like, so all this shit in the Old Testament, and then Jesus comes along talking about, love and forgiveness. I'm like, the Old Testament does not look like love and forgiveness. It looks like marry, 14 wives and kill everybody that doesn't agree with you, and violence and floods and pestilence and, what is that other word? It was famines, and obey me or die. I'm like, gee, was Jesus God's apology? And again, even to say that, it's just like, so you're questioning God. And that was the original sin, right? That was the original sin. The original sin was, don't ask any fucking questions. Know nothing. Why would somebody tell you to know nothing? Because there's something to know. If you're hiding something, it means there's something there. I don't need to hide what isn't there. You don't need to hide what's in an empty closet if the closet's empty. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. So have a bunch of kids, work this land. This doesn't sound like heaven to me. Have a bunch of kids, work this land, dominate it, subdue it, make it yours, do whatever you want to do with it, because this all made me happy to create. You're separate from me. You're nothing, but don't eat from the tree of knowledge. And I think at the end of Genesis 1, it says that they were naked and they were not afraid, or they were unashamed, I think is what it says. And I view that not to be like, okay, again, like this wonderful garden where there's all this work and all of these, kids to have. And that doesn't really say they have any kids till after they're banned out, but I'm just thinking about this. There's all this stuff to do, and it's just so lovely and so great. I view nakedness as vulnerability. I view nakedness as they had no protection, and they were unashamed because they didn't realize they needed protection from anything. They didn't realize there was anything wrong with this. And this happens to all of us, I think, at different stages of life, whether you're on a quote unquote spiritual path or not, where you come to understand that the things that you knew before are not things that are going to be conducive to your further growth, your further development as a person. And you think about, wow, how vulnerable you were when you didn't have that level of knowledge. You think about how vulnerable you were when you were a teen and you were just, lottie-dotting around and, trying to figure out what to do about relationships, trying to figure out what to do about school. And some of us try to go back to that type of innocence and vulnerability, but innocence, I would say, yeah, is the lack. I was going to say lack of tampering. That's not exactly what I want to say. Like the lack of tarnishing. And I would really more specifically say that innocence is a lack of experience, because we live in a world of separation. We live in a world of duality, and with that duality, there is the knowledge of good and evil, and that I hate good and evil. So those are value, judgments, identifications, and labels. I don't like those, but that everything, that black exists because of white and white exists because of black. That we can know abundance because we have knowledge of poverty, because we can know depression, we can know sadness because we know joy, and that depression is on the same spectrum of experience, for instance, as joy. It's just that spectrum of experience inverted in and on itself. So anyway, back to, why would somebody tell you I don't want you to know the difference between good and evil? So when they were naked, I view that as they were vulnerable and they were cool with it. They were just fine. Or when you think about it, if you've ever had these experiences where you find out just truly that somebody lives differently from you. It could be as you're a child, as a teen, maybe even later. It's finding out the difference between, like in certain parts of the Midwest where I live, people call dinner supper. And then you go somewhere else and all of a sudden it's dinner. Or way down south, I know older individuals might call sodas sodies. And then you go somewhere else and it's like, no, we don't even call it soda. We call it Fanta or Sprite or whatever it is. Or in certain parts of the United States where everything's a Coke. So it's looking at the fact that, like, okay, you might not realize, and there's nothing to be like, those are very, minute examples, but there's nothing to be ashamed of in terms of what you call whatever, supper, dinner, Cokes or sodas, whatever. But it's that understanding that, oh, there's something else besides this. I had no idea that there's a whole other area of my country that doesn't operate the way that I do. But that's not really a good example because that's not very consequential, right? Like, who really cares about that? But working in the field of mental wellness for many years, I mean, probably every day I hear a story of someone that has experienced some type of horrific childhood abuse, and they can recount the moment where they recognized that what they were experiencing at home was not normal, that wasn't what their friends were experiencing, and that wasn't what one should expect from a parent-child relationship. So yeah, something more consequential like that, where when you're in an environment and that environment sculpts your expectation for experience, and going back to this garden, you don't know that there's anything else. You would have to be outside of that environment or get knowledge from the outside that that's not how things are supposed to be. So that's the end of Genesis. They were naked and they were cool with it. They were unashamed. But I view that as vulnerability. I view that as a type of innocence that is without knowledge. So then the snake comes up, and that's what I was talking about, the snake. Snakes are ambiguous. They're not really good and they're not really bad. Snakes just are. And so the snake comes up and is like, why, you're allowed to eat from every tree here, huh? Yeah, every tree, science goes up to Eve too, which I think that's, because I think about that too, because the masculine mind, we all have a masculine being and a feminine being, a masculine mindedness and a feminine mindedness that operate in terms of energy. We all have the capacity to give and to receive in energy. That has nothing to do with body parts or gender presentation or phenotypical presentation or what you were born as or what the doctor says or what the president says or who's trying to tell you, what you should label yourself as or what you want to label yourself as. It has nothing to do with any of that. So then Eve representing, the feminine, which is the creative aspect of us, the curious aspect of us, the receptive aspect of us. Adam, I don't remember quite where it says the where he was at this point in time when Eve got tempted, but I imagine he's working. Adam, the masculine mind, is tending to logic, is tending to what's known, is tending to what's fixed, is tending to what can be seen. And again, both sides are equally important. Because they operate in tandem, because you can't have creativity and curiosity without structure, but structure without the vast expansiveness of curiosity and the undoing is stagnation. So the snake wanders up to, I don't even view it as Eve being a beginning, but wanders up to curiosity, wanders up to that which receives, that which is more expansive in her consideration, that side of us that's willing to ponder. Snake wanders up and says, what about that tree of knowledge over there? You could become like God. Doesn't that sound nice? Why wouldn't you? I mean, did God really say that you would be, pushed out of the kingdom? Is that really what I don't know. I think you should eat it. So then, what does the fruit then come to represent? I think the fruit is awakening. I think this was man's first, and when I say man, I mean just humans. Again, I'm not necessarily even talking about like a real Garden of Eden either, but the story being representative of man's first awakening and what happens when you awaken to the truth of what's around you, the truth of what's happening here on this realm. Truth often isn't pretty. Truth can be pretty. I mean, again, truth is like the snake. Truth just is. Truth is not good nor bad. It can be painful, certainly, but truth is the awakening. So the snake offers Eve, the feminine, the receptive, the curious, the fruit, and they eat the fruit, and I think she offers it to Adam. And, then they have this fruit, and then they realize that they're naked. So you eat the truth, and you realize how vulnerable you've been to all of this, which I can imagine, like, waking up and being like, oh shit, this is slavery. And when I talk about slavery, I mean, like, just a sense of being owned, of being controlled, having a lack of autonomy. How can you have true autonomy? How can you have true freedom where there is no knowledge? How could you truly, now you can have what you believe to be freedom in ignorance, the whole, like, quite literally. I mean, I think bliss is ignorance, comes specifically, now I'm not saying it culturally comes from this, I don't know where that came from, but what I mean is that, I could see that the origin of that statement coming from Genesis, that like everything was fine, everything was perfect until we woke up to the truth of what the scenario actually was, thanks to the serpent. Because the serpent, this symbol of transformation, of death and rebirth, wanders up to curiosity and says, what if you don't know everything? And how wouldn't it be great to be like God? And why would curiosity? Because curiosity wants to become more. If they were so happy, what would even be the draw? What would even, if Eden was this perfect, wonderful place, what would even be the draw to become more, to gain knowledge? So, and then, this is just my position. I don't even think that they were cast out of even Eden. I think that Eden was this like conceptual, like frequential framework that they were locked in by way of their ignorance, and that they then got cast out. But really, they didn't get cast out. They just awoken. They just awake. I don't know. They became awake to the truth of the reality of what it actually was, which then, yes, cast you out of any previous delusions or illusions that you had been maintaining about the fact that the oppressor, that your subordination, that your suppression, and that your imprisonment was actually your freedom. It destroys all of those illusions that anything that tells me that I don't know, that I don't deserve the truth, that I'm not like God or that I'm not God, that subdues me, all that is darkness. When you awaken, when you eat the fruit of the truth, or in today's, I forget which pill it is you're supposed to take, the red pill or the blue pill, some pill. I know red pillers, they hate women, so maybe it's not the red pill. I don't know. But when you whatever it is, when you take this, this sacrament of truth and you consume it, and that truth becomes you then you resurrect from all of the illusions that taught you that your slavery, that your oppression was freedom. Which the oppressor would absolutely not want you to know that you're in prison. Why are there so many, I don't want to get into, it's too much of race theory, but if we're just talking about the history of the United States, we look at a lot of, trying to think of like what to call it, show business culture in the early 1900s, might have been late 1800s, but early 1900s definitely, about minstrelsy. And if you don't know what that is, like look that up. The minstrels, they went in, they play these characters, and the characters were in blackface, and they would sing and they would dance, and there would be these like whole, kind of showcase reviews, REVUE, reviews of, dance, and this display that the slaves were happy, essentially. And why would it be important for the history of the United States, the history of the majority at the very least? And I say this, not to hide in consciousness. This is just how I think. This is how I talk. I liken it to that, because we're all the same thing. I mean, we're just represented in different ways. So, it doesn't really matter, but why would it be important for because who is watching these? Who is the showcase for? Okay, well, it was for other members of the majority. Why would it be important for them to think that the slaves were happy? And why would it be important for the United States to I was going to say, kind of, push a narrative, promote a message that the slaves were happy? Because if there's no knowledge of what actually was, we don't have to contend with what the truth actually is. And that truth is very painful. It's very painful. We look around and we look at what's built and we look at how we got here. And that was marred with hideous atrocities. But if there's a concealing of that fact, if there's a lack of knowledge as to how we got to the year 1900, building a nation, then we don't have to contend with what was. So I said that to say that, and I believe that all of us, if we're living at a base level of 3D consciousness, we are enslaved already. And what I mean by that is, working jobs that we hate in order to pay bills that, we maybe, can afford. A lot of us are having children, not really thinking about if it's the right time or if we should have children. And when's the right time? I'm not criticizing, I'm queer, so I don't ever have to worry about that. But I'm not talking, but I do understand that there's no right time to have a child. I don't necessarily mean that, but you know, some of us are having children when we cannot fully take care of ourselves. And then those children get abused, and then they get into the system, and then they run into me, and and then they have kids, and then those kids get taken by the system, and this just continues to start over. This cycle just continues. So, but back to truth, back to what I was saying about truth is I don't even think they were really cast out. I think that they became awakened to the truth of their imprisonment and the truth of their slavery in the first place. And then so then when they're cast out, well, now they're responsible for themselves because they've learned that they're like God. And this is what happens when you wake up. Think about waking up from a long sleep. You know, Elvis used to do this, or at least there's reports of Elvis doing this. That he would, or you could liken it to quite literally going to prison. But apparently, in order to like lose weight for periods of time and also to rest in between tours, he would have. And again, this is like celebrity rumor only. Look it up. It may or may not be true, but it serves the purpose of what I have to say. That you know, so it doesn't really matter if it's true, but that he would like go into these like sleep comas in order to like lose weight. And then, you know, and sometimes his comas would be for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then he'd wake up and, I mean, they'd be, you know, I guess feeding him on a drip tube. I don't know. But, you know, then he'd wake up and he'd be thin again. Or think about like going to prison. I mean, think about like, you know, removing yourself, like going into this like sleep-like state or going into this like dark hole or this cave or this prison, maybe physically behind bars. You know, what happens when you wake up out of that, or you know, we could even just take it to your real life. What happens when you, I mean, at least I know what happened to me. I mean, when you wake up out of that sleeping state, out of that lack of knowledge, out of that lack of consciousness, you realize that so many things have been created in your absence. Think about a prisoner that's been even just been put away for 3 years. So many things have changed in the last 3 years. Or think about if you went to sleep for 6 weeks. Well, everything continued to happen around you. And you then have to wake up and become conscious. I don't mean conscious in terms of waking up, and you then have to gain awareness of that which happened when you were away, when you were in the tomb, when you were asleep. So when you awaken to this knowledge, and I taking this back to Adam and Eve, and then they get cast down, and apparently it's like terrible conditions, and you know now they are having kids, and you know working the fields, and the fields aren't very fertile, and because they've learned now that they're like God, they're not under the protection of this quote unquote Garden of Eden where they're happy to receive what they're given and nothing more. They're not under that. I mean, again, I said protection, but you know that wing of oppression, essentially, like that sheathing, that covering. So you know, think about it as prison. Like, yeah, you get 3 hots and a cot, sure. Okay, so then when you get free, when you're released, well, now you got to find your own cot. Better hope somebody's waiting for you on the outside, you know. And they didn't have anybody waiting for them on the outside. It was just them. So you get released out of prison. Think about this, even just in a physical, you know, in our 3D realm. You got, you know, a record as a felon, probably, unless you know it was a misdemeanor. But you know, you got a record, you got a label, no credit score, no job, probably not a car, probably a lot of burned bridges, probably not very much support from your family. And here you are, you're free. You can have everything that you were denied in prison, and you now are the source of your own means, which is probably why recidivism is so high. Because if we, you know, recidivism rates are so high because if we think about those circumstances, somebody has just been released, now they have to care for themselves. Well, I mean, unless they've made some radical changes in the heart of their mind and the mind of their heart, they are probably going to go back to what they were doing to acquire resources previously to being incarcerated, which might land them back there. So now they had their 3 hots and a cot in Eden, and now they don't. Now it's terrible, but they've been told they're like God. So their responsibility at that point in time is to be responsible for the consciousness and the awareness of their own Eden. And the story is not necessarily written like that, though. So then you have and then ensues the rest of the Old Testament, where, this warmongering, just angry, pissed off, irritable, vengeful, wrathful, jealous God. And then the New Testament starts and Jesus comes over, make it sound like he's chilling. He comes on over to our, base level of 3D reality. And he's like, what are you all doing? The kingdom of heaven is inside. And Jesus then represents that New Testament, the New Testament, a testament of newness. Then we see divinity in man. We see what actually Adam and Eve got told. They said, eat the fruit. The serpent said, eat the fruit, you'll become like God. But that truth never really manifested. That truth never really became something. It became their hardship. It became their toiling. And that's exactly what's going to happen once you awaken to all of this. I mean, if you've been living sleep awake for 25 years, 30 years, 45 years, 50 years old, 60 years old. I mean, depending on when you become aware of this knowledge, you're going to realize that everything you created prior to that was a result of your sleeping consciousness, was a result of you co-signing on your own oppression within this 3D realm. And everything that you created out of that, be it relationships, career pathways, lack of career pathways, lack of purpose, lack of vision, the vision and purpose that you did have, all of that is going to be ripped away from you, and you're going to descend into the darkness. You're going to descend into hardship after learning the truth, because you're going to see that everything that you created up until that point was you playing in the darkness in the first place, having no idea that there was a difference between darkness and light, or knowledge of good and evil. Then Jesus comes and says, I am the light, I am the way, and shows us that if you can agree, because you'll only see what you are. So if we could then agree that there was a man on earth that was the Son of Man, and it was the Son of Man and the Son of God, that was divinity incarnate. If we could recognize the incarnate divinity of him, that means that, the implicit message there is that we are that also. That the kingdom of heaven is within. Again, because you can only see what you are. So Jesus all the time is asking, who do you say that I am? Or, do you believe it to be so? When people come and ask him to heal them, and, he's like, but who do you say that I am? Meaning, if you see my divinity, you see your divinity, and divinity is the totality of all things. Divinity is source consciousness. Divinity is the fact that it's already done. So if you see my divinity, that means that you see your divinity, which means you know that it is already done and the healing is already complete. So Jesus comes after all that hell, where we never really learn what the fruit actually was, for tracking it that way, and says that it's you, it's me, it's here, it's us. We're it. We are like God. We are God. That the Father, that I am one with the Father is greater than I. So I'm an individualized expression of source consciousness, but obviously I am not all of source consciousness. If I was all of source consciousness, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I wouldn't be in a skin suit. Something to think about. Wrapping up today's transmission of the Ministry of Assumption Absolute. My name is Lucien Francois Mateo St. James. I am a spiritual epidemiologist. Thank you for co-creating this moment with me. Check out, it is linked in my bio, the Liberation Chronicle. That's the weekly newsletter and podcast attached to that. Loose ends and unasked questions is the podcast attached to that. Check me out there for my poetry, my musings, and just the written word of this platform. And then there's Dispatches from the Edge of Obvious, a Spotify exclusive podcast that is linked to the bio as well. So remember to be good to yourselves and others, because everybody's just a representation of you anyway. Until next time.